This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. PLI is committed to keeping you ever current on the dynamic trends shaping the legal world. Learn more at pli.edu/ftpod.
Welcome to Fast Tracked, Emergent Issues in the Legal Profession, brought to you by the Practicing Law Institute. I'm your host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers. Buckle up as we hit the gas and explore the most dynamic trends shaping the legal world. I hope you'll join us as we explore the future of law today. Welcome, everyone, to the Fast Tracked podcast, PLI's podcast about all the emerging trends happening in legal and what the implications might be for lawyers, judges, professors, and other professionals in the industry. I'm Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers and your host on this journey. And I am so thrilled today to be joined by Adam Unikowsky. Adam is a partner with Jenner & Block, and he specializes in appellate and Supreme Court litigation. Adam, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited.
Same. And we are going to talk to you today all about a topic. I'm not sure if people have heard of this yet, but there's something called artificial intelligence. And if you haven't heard about it, probably going to hear about it soon. You might be sick of hearing about it at this point if you're in legal, but I think our guest has really interesting and insightful perspectives on what the future of an AI-infused practice might look like, what it might look like for the profession and for judges and for civil and criminal justice. So I'm so thrilled that you're here to talk to us about this, Adam. And usually, given our name, Fast Tracked, we try to be efficient with our introductions and read just titles. But in your case, I think it's really helpful for listeners to understand some of the contours of your background. I personally want to thank you because I present frequently to very skeptical lawyers, particularly law firm partners and judges. And my presentation, I like to think, is impactful, but it's much more impactful when I can bring to it some quotes from some really esteemed professionals in this regard. So could you share a little bit with the audience about your background?
Sure. So I'll start out my undergraduate studies. I was in high school, I was one of those weird tech people who were obsessed with science and computers. And so I went to MIT as an undergrad, and I studied physics and electrical engineering and computer science there because, I was obsessed with the internet, essentially, and computers and the future of technology. And along the way, I got sidetracked at some point, decided to go to law school. And so I did. I always tell people it's because I like to argue. That's, people always say you shouldn't go to law school for that reason, but that's sort of the reason I went to law. So I went to law school, and then after law school, I clerked for the DC Circuit for Judge Douglas Ginsburg, and then for the Supreme Court for Justice Scalia. And other than that, I've spent my entire professional career at Jenner & Block in Washington, D.C., where I'm now a partner.
So you have a very specific and interesting background that blends technology with appellate practice at the highest levels, which is why I find your quotes so compelling and useful in persuading skeptics of the value and possibilities that AI creates. So your first sort of tour through emerging technologies happened when the internet emerged. How do you compare this moment with the moment of the birth of the internet?
I think it's similar in magnitude. The birth of the internet has dramatically transformed our world. Every aspect of what we do every day is in some sense influenced by the internet. From driving our car to going to work to spending our lives in front of a computer screen to going home to interacting with other people. I mean, if you think about the number of ways the internet affects our daily lives as to compare to what they were beforehand, it's touched everything. And I think that AI is similar in magnitude. Already I'm finding that I just use it as part of my ordinary daily routine. And that's with versions of AI that exist today that will be considered positively primitive compared to the new versions which are under development.
Yeah, the dial-up of 2025, right? And we're going to talk about applications for lawyers, but I'm curious what your most delightful personal application of generative AI has been.
Well, I'll give you two examples. One is that I use it to compose clever bedtime stories for my kids when I don't have any good ideas. And it's probably more clever than I would come up with, especially at night when I want to go to bed. Here's just another very minor example. So I was in my basement, and there was a black piece of plastic that was on the floor, or sort of rubbery plastic. I just didn't know what it was. And then I just took a picture of it and uploaded it to Claude AI. And I said, "What is this?" And it said, "Oh, that's a seal on a particular model of goggles." And then I was like, "Oh." And then I looked around, and sort of in the other room, there was the goggles that was missing the seal. I would never have known that. That's a very, very minor thing. But it's just like the little mysteries of daily life are just immediately solved. Now, I mean, I would have probably figured it out eventually, maybe got new goggles. It's just, I couldn't believe that it was able to do that. And that multiplied by many interactions in which some piece of information that I don't understand, it just answers it right away.
Yeah. I use it for things like that all the time too. I couldn't figure out what filter my refrigerator water dispenser used. So I just took a picture of like the cavity in the refrigerator that would house it, because I couldn't even see the tiny writing, and it knew. And then I was able to copy and paste the model into Amazon and order the filter. I use it for things like that all the time. And this question that I'm going to ask is not on our list of questions, but given your background, I'm going to ask you anyway, because I'm curious about it all the time. I know that, the design that underpins generative AI is that it's probabilistic and it's guessing the next most likely token in a sequence based on your prompt. But when I use it for things like that, it doesn't feel to me like that's actually how it would get to that result. Do you have any sense as to whether that is actually, if you show it a photo, that it can tell you the model of a filter, or that it's from a goggles? Or do you think there are other things happening underneath?
Well, it's definitely doing some degree of image processing and comparing the image to a massive database of images that it already has. The natural language response is certainly based on the probabilistic model that you've described. It's very hard to form intuitions about what's really going on under the hood, because it seems crazy that just this probabilistic analysis, just a bunch of math, could create outputs that seem quite human-like, perhaps superhuman-like in some cases. The way I like to think about it is no one really understands how the brain really works either. It seems remarkable that just by firing some neurons, we could come up with the things that we do, that a baby, just from having listened to people speak a particular language for a couple of years, suddenly masters that language, memorizes all the words, understands the grammar, is able to communicate. It just seems mind-boggling that happens, but it just happens every day. And so it's just very hard to form intuitions about these type of complex processes. We just sort of see empirically that they work, and we have to kind of run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's why I always say, in speaking with lawyers, if you talk with another lawyer who claims that she knows exactly how generative AI works and can tell you all of the flaws and the benefits, seek a second opinion, because even the best technologists in the world don't know exactly how it does the work that it does. It's extremely arcane. But moving to lawyers, I have been following a lot of your work on Substack. You have a fantastic Substack where you run different experiments, particularly with Claude. Is there a reason you prefer Claude to ChatGPT or other AIs?
They're both, ChatGPT is excellent as well. I mean, all of these products are incredible and mind-boggling advancements over what we had a couple of years ago. Claude is pretty good at accepting PDFs, sort of a silly reason, but I work with PDFs a lot as a lawyer. And also, I just think it's a good writer. I have found that it has its own personality, which I like. I don't know, I think it does a great job, but I actually also have a ChatGPT Pro account, and I use that all the time too. All of my images on my Substack posts are created with OpenAI, ChatGPT, because Claude doesn't create those beautiful images. So I actually use both.
So you're running these experiments on Substack and then writing about them and thinking about different areas of the profession where AI might be infused. And in one of my pieces, you had a line. You're obviously a fantastic writer, which is one of the reasons I love reading your pieces, but you have a line that made me laugh. And the line is, quote, "With essentially no guidance, AI can draft briefs that are better than the briefs drafted by the human lawyers in this case. This isn't intended as a criticism of the human lawyers whose briefs were fine. It's just hard to compete with AI," end quote. And I love this quote because it turns the argument that I always hear from lawyers, which is AI could never compete with us, on its head, that it's already progressed to the point where it's difficult for the average human, maybe the average lawyer, to compete with it. So can you talk a little bit about what in particular is so impressive about the outputs to you?
Well, the speed at which it can process information vastly exceeds human speed. So let me just give you an example. Suppose you have a fully briefed appellate case and you want AI to answer questions on it. So you have an opening brief, response brief, and a reply brief. And you want the AI to summarize the briefs, figure out who's going to win or give a probability who's going to win, ask moot court questions, figure out problems in both sides' cases, maybe come up with some surreply arguments. So if you just upload those briefs into Claude, for example, which I use, it takes about 5 seconds or 10 seconds for it to process all that information, and then it immediately can start giving trenchant answers. So for example, you take the briefs in a case, you upload it, 10 seconds later it says, done, and then you ask questions like, come up with 30 trenchant oral argument questions that a conservative-leaning judge might ask. It will do that quite well, maybe even very well. So clearly a human cannot do that. No human could master a complicated case in 10 seconds and offer intelligent commentary about it. And not just that, suppose the court granted leave to write a surreply brief. If you say, write an intro or an outline of a surreply brief, it could do a pretty good job, again, in seconds after having seen the briefs for the first time. There's no possible way a human can do that. Now, maybe you can say, well, the output of the AI isn't as good as a hypothetical brilliant human could generate if it really mastered the human mastered the briefs and wrote some really punchy piece of legal writing. Maybe that's the case. It's debatable, but maybe. But there's certain aspects of AI's ability that humans cannot even come close to. It's not even a contest. So, that's what makes it tough to compete, because there's certain things that it clearly can do better than us, and there's some things that we can probably do better than it at this moment in time. And that's a competition. Although AI is getting better more quickly than humans are.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the trend line for us looks like, but I'm pretty sure the trend line for AI is exponential. And I wonder if you've run these experiments with the new reasoning models that are coming out from OpenAI, and are they different in nature if you give it a complicated case to brief, for example? I don't know. Have you done that yet?
Yeah, so I think that like O1, you can't input documents into it quite yet. At least the last time I checked. I'm sure that's going to change very soon. I don't pay the $200 a month for O1 Pro, although I've heard it's absolutely incredible. I mean, these things are going to change very quickly. O3 is coming out probably in the first quarter, and I'm sure that will change. I will say that I do use the reasoning models, and the results are outstanding, especially with complicated questions. I mean, hard LSAT problems that AI used to struggle with are handled easily by the reasoning models. And so it's pretty remarkable what they're able to do.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen, and it's probably from your work, so forgive me if I'm blending it with a lot of other thought leaders, but thinking through, I think it is actually from some of your work for legislative attorneys, thinking through how to draft legislation and considering unintended consequences of different language choices is something that stood out to me as the type of thing that smart human beings, sit in rooms and debate and deliberate around. And sometimes the AI are producing unintended consequences that certainly would never occur to me, but seem obvious when I look at it from the AI's perspective.
Absolutely. So one of my blog posts talked about a case from the Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit about an ambiguity in a sentencing guidelines enhancement that applies when an armed robber physically restrains a victim. That's what the words say, physically restrains. And so courts have struggled with the question of how to deal with that guideline when the robber holds someone up at gunpoint but doesn't actually touch them, tie them up. And there's this circuit split over this issue that prompted Judge Newsom in that particular case to write a concurrence about the use of AI in judging. And if you just ask AI, okay, here's this guideline, tell me where it's ambiguous. Within 1 second, it comes up with this exact fact pattern, as well as several other fact patterns in which ambiguities may arise. And so I just don't think there's any excuse for not taking any draft piece of legislation or guideline or regulation or anything else and just saying, hey, when is this going to cause interpretive problems in the real world, and what can I do to fix it? And then it'll say, well, this, and this. You'll be like, oh my God, you're right. I didn't realize that. And it can just do that instantly and come up with as arbitrary numbers of potential difficult interpretive questions, 10, 20, 30. So it's quite remarkable in that regard.
Yeah. And it seems like there are so many applications using that on the business side of law as well, considering different strategic approaches to leading a firm. What might some of the unintended consequences of this decision be versus that, which is really amazing.
Absolutely. Every aspect of the management of a law firm can be facilitated. Just for example, recently, I was in a negotiation with a client over how to structure a fee arrangement. And I just asked out of curiosity, here's where I am and here's where the client is, and come up with some ways to structure our fee arrangement that might be satisfactory to both. And it comes up with like 30 different creative solutions. Now, you don't have to use them. Some of them are silly or whatever, but no human could instantly come up with what the AI came up with. Now, people focus on the drawbacks and hallucinations. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But the ability to come up with lots of ideas on the fly instantly is clearly beyond humans' ability.
Absolutely. And, the interesting thing about the development of AI, at least generative AI post-release of ChatGPT, is how quickly sort of cliches or myths get baked into the public consciousness, and then how rapidly the technology changes, but how long it takes for the humans to catch up. So I still hear humans say, it'll never be creative like we're creative. I mean, to my mind, it's so much more creative than I am in many different ways. And I think it can spur our creativity. But how do you think about that, about the idea of helping people understand that the pace of this technology means that the truths that we think are true today and may be true today could be not true by this afternoon? And what does that look like in terms of change management for human beings?
Well, I think that's a difficult problem that goes well beyond law. If the tasks that we engage in every day can be automated, eventually the people who are paying for us to do those tasks are going to wake up and notice. And there's broad questions about how the economy is going to change, what people are going to do for a living if suddenly they're not doing the things that they're used to do. And all of that will depend on the pace of technological growth. AI right now certainly is competent enough to replace many workers in the economy as soon as people get used to it. But it does not seem that the pace of growth is really slowing down. OpenAI announced O3 with amazing benchmarks. Anthropic has said that its models are growing with leaps and bounds. There's this DeepSeek model from China that was recently released, which is apparently incredible according to people I know who have used it. I haven't done it myself. It's also very inexpensive, and that is a game changer as well. There's a lot of competition in this area. As we know, there's Grok, there's Gemini as well. And so I'm sure that the competition will spur technological advancement. And so we don't know how good the technology is going to get, and that obviously is going to influence the degree of change and of change management that's going to be needed. I don't really know where we're going to be in 5 years. It's hard for me to imagine, but there's certainly some versions of the future in which there would be pretty dramatic social change.
Let me ask you a question about something you just talked about, which is the sort of arms race among technology companies to develop more and more powerful AI. And I think we would both agree this is not going to slow down anytime soon. In fact, it's going to accelerate if that's even possible at this point. And when I talk with lawyers in private sector part of the profession, there seems to be at least an acceptance of that might be the reality, and how do we adapt? When I talk with people who are very concerned about the impact in the public interest realm and in marginalized communities and the provision of legal services and some of the biases and hallucinations in the current models, people will sort of be understandably concerned about this and also upset that there's not a broader conversation happening about the choices that we're making with the technology. To my mind, it's a question of figuring out what you actually can control and contributing to that. But I wonder how you would talk to a group of people who are concerned about this and help them understand that the reality is that the technology will continue to advance. And we have choices that we can make as individual lawyers to improve the future of law. I'm wondering if you agree with that worldview and if there's anything more helpful that we could provide to the public interest community and courts that are concerned about some of those issues.
Well, to the public interest community, I would say that AI is the best thing that's ever happened to you because it improves access to justice and levels the playing field between, poorly resourced public interest lawyers and defendants, which may have a lot more resources. First of all, the public interest organizations themselves can use it. It's actually not that expensive. I pay $20 a month for Claude. That's it. And even the more expensive versions aren't terribly expensive, and it can produce excellent work product that may be as good or better than what the organizations themselves are improving. And that's also true for people who can't afford a lawyer. Suppose you're someone who is the victim of a legal violation. You're not sophisticated. You may be poor. You can't afford a lawyer, but you have a cell phone, and you can afford even a free AI service. If you ask the AI, what are my legal rights? Here are the bad things that have happened to me. Can you please write a complaint for me and tell me where to go and file it? It will do that. And although there's hallucinations now, and again, we can talk about that, it'll do a bang-up job and much better than that person would be able to do without a lawyer. And so if we're talking about improving access to justice and helping people access legal resources, it's a great leap forward. In terms of biases, everyone has a bias. That said, I think AI companies are working hard to reduce certain types of biases that exist in their products. And the other nice thing about many of these products is you can sort of ask it not to be biased, and it won't. That sounds really strange, but if you think that the output is too skewed, let's say you think that Claude is too skewed in a right-wing direction or something like that, you simply ask it at the outset of the conversation, this is my point of view, this is my worldview, and I want you to think about that, and I want all of your responses to be presented from that perspective. And it kind of does it. And so I think these tools are incredibly flexible and able to take whatever perspective you want on the world. So I'm very optimistic about this technology to overcome biases that maybe exist and be helpful to all communities, including communities that have fewer resources.
So thank you for that. And I want to come back to some of the conversation about humans and AI. I don't want to say humans versus AI, humans with AI. And you are, of course, a writer as a professional. And I've heard you speak in other contexts about the importance of collaborating with other humans to strengthen your writing. And I've also followed your experiments on how you use AI to strengthen your writing or write on its own. If we rely exclusively on AI as a writing partner, do we miss some of the randomness of the human perspectives around us? And what value do the humans contribute to our writing and thinking?
I think that a lot of AI generated output right now is slop, primarily because a lot of human created output also is slop. But I think it's hard for an AI to create something with a lot of personality or a real masterwork. That kind of thing, I still trust humans to do. I will say in my own blog posts, partially because it's a hobby of mine and I like my own personality coming through, I don't outsource the writing process to AI. That's all my writing, and I'll probably continue to write it in the near term. I think that some types of writing, you don't really need to have a lot of creativity. If you're writing to your insurance company, it's perfectly fine to use AI. The human spirit doesn't really necessarily have to come out in all interactions with your insurance company. So there's certain types of writing that I think are fine to outsource. But as you said, I think that the best case scenario is humans and AI collaborate. That's what I do. I think when I'm trying to come up with when I'm trying to come up with an idea, or I'm trying to solve a difficult intellectual problem, I bounce ideas off of it. I still trust my own judgment. But I also feel like this infinite idea generator will come up with things that I just couldn't come up with, particularly on short time spans. And so by using AI's prodigious speed and ability to come up with lots of different ideas and the judgment that I have and I've developed over the course of my lifetime, I think that the output is better than either of us could do alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about this in the context of solo practitioners, how much of a benefit up till now it's been to be surrounded by other human lawyers, and you can pop into their office and brainstorm some new ideas or ask them their thoughts on a case. But I imagine that practicing alone as a human being has been not only maybe lonely, but also maybe doesn't allow you to bring your best lawyering to the table. So do you see opportunities for solo practitioners, small practices to use this in ways they might not be thinking about?
Absolutely. I would find it extremely difficult to practice alone because I always feel like I'm missing something. Every time I write a brief and I give it to a colleague, there's always a suggestion to make it better that I take because it's very hard for one person to see every angle. And I enjoy working with colleagues just because it's fun to collaborate, but I just feel it improves work product when you have two people or multiple people looking at the same brief. And so I know a lot of solo practitioners, I admire their work. I just think it's very hard. And if they have a robot to bounce ideas off of and say, come up with every single possible argument you can think of in this situation and say, what's wrong with my brief? Which parts can be improved? And it gives pretty good answers. I mean, I would love that. I would think it's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah. And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about some of the skills deficits that have emerged during the post-COVID era for junior lawyers. And I'm not necessarily a proponent of everybody going back to the office the way it was in 2019. But I agree with you and remember practicing law where there was huge value in being able to stop by and learn from somebody else and learn together. So I'm even envisioning ways that firms can be using their own internal LLMs to help their virtual associates or hybrid associates think through problems both with an AI and then elevating those to somebody on a Zoom call maybe might be the world that we enter into now. What do you think about that?
I agree, especially when many people work remotely and demand to work remotely, that human interaction goes down. I mean, it's true we still have pre-planned Zoom sessions, but it's not quite like wandering to someone's office. And I do think that an LLM may fill the gap to some extent. I mean, my vision of the future, which I think is inevitable, is that every lawyer has an LLM open on their desk and they're interacting with the LLM. They're asking questions. They're asking for help improving a brief. The LLM might format something or edit something or come up with some idea, but we're not turning over the keys to the LLM, but we're deploying its skills to improve our own abilities. And part of that might be asking for ideas, and it's going to give ideas back.
Mm-hmm. And so we've talked a little bit about your Substack piece about the 11th Circuit appeal. Where are the areas where you think AI could most positively affect the practice of law in the profession?
I think alternative dispute resolution is a big one. It seems creepy to have an AI decide or maybe almost decide or come up with a recommended decision in a dispute, but it actually kind of is rational in many cases. It's not obvious the AI will be worse at deciding the case than some arbitrators. I've done some arbitrations where the arbitration decisions have been questionable from my perspective. The other thing is the AI works instantly. It's essentially free. And you can ask the AI in advance how it's going to rule if you know in advance which AI is going to decide on the case, thus avoiding the challenge of going through the arbitration in the first place. So in terms of dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution, I think AI has incredible potential. I think it has incredible potential among lawyering as well to save time and money and make us more efficient while also making us better. I dream of the day where no lawyer ever waives an argument ever again. That's my great fear in litigation, is that I'll just mess up and miss an argument. Then the other side's going to come back and say, well, they didn't preserve it. The judge will say, well, it's an interesting issue, but it's forfeited. Sorry, too bad. And that's my nightmare, and it happens to everybody. And that will go away when you have an AI saying, you've missed this. Be careful. That sounds great to me. And also in judging, I think one of the problems with judging in America now is there's just not enough judges, and the result is very slow decisions, and justice delayed is justice denied. It's not uncommon to wait 1 year, 2 years for an appellate decision, even in the district court. You might file a summary judgment motion. Sometimes you wait 12 months, 18 months. And it's not because the judges are slow or bad. It's just that they have massive dockets. and it's very hard to get through everything. And delays, for many reasons, delays are contrary to the administration of justice. And I dream of an era in which I'm not saying judges should use AI to decide the cases, but it could provide a recommendation, it could summarize the briefs, it could draft an initial decision, the judge can edit it, and it can go out. Instead of waiting 6 months, you can wait 6 days or 6 hours. And I think that will, as I said, improve the administration of justice. And I think it has amazing potential in that area.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit. We've had conversations on this season with different guests about the differences between using AI in lawyering and using AI in judging. And we've had different perspectives expressed. Some of those include, it's acceptable in lawyering because the goal is to get the arguments before the court. And if AI can do that more quickly and equally well or maybe better than lawyers, then we should have it be doing that. But once it's in court, we want the human judges to really be weighing the parties' arguments and applying them to the facts, because that's what's valuable about the justice system. How would you respond to that argument? And do you view using AI in lawyering as different from using AI in judging?
I definitely view using AI in lawyering as different from using AI in judging. As you say, using AI in lawyering seems less controversial because it's not someone making a decision about someone's life. It's just someone writing a set of arguments. And concerns over bias or errors are attenuated because there's going to be another AI brief on the other side pointing out all of those errors. And when a judge reads a brief by a lawyer, the judge is always skeptical. So the risks of just turning over the justice system to AI and trusting it too much, as I say, are more attenuated when we're talking about a brief by a lawyer that wouldn't necessarily be trusted anyway and has another brief attacking it. So that part seems uncontroversial. Then there's the question about AI in judging. I am not suggesting, as I say, turning over the keys to the justice system to AI so that a robot makes very important decisions about our lives. I think you should be able to consent to that in the context of arbitration. But when you're hailed into court involuntarily and you're sued, I kind of feel more comfortable with a human making that decision, maybe just out of habit or out of sentimentality towards a human-operated justice system. That doesn't mean that we have to rid the judging process of AI altogether. AI can prepare a recommendation, which the judge can follow or can decline to follow, just like law clerks make recommendations right now. The AI can write an opinion very quickly in seconds, which the judge can edit. The AI can also verify for accuracy. Sometimes judges just make mistakes. They miss arguments in the record. It happens. And AI can be used to improve the quality of judicial decision-making in that respect. So I think that AI has a lot of capabilities that could improve and speed up the judging process without taking away ultimate decision-making authority from the human judge.
Not to overgeneralize, but I'll overgeneralize that lawyers, especially in private practice, are incentivized in many ways to outmatch their opposing counsel and find ways to strengthen their lawyering and bring down costs for their clients at the same time, or they will be incentivized as clients become more attuned to AI and its capabilities. Judges have different incentive structures and pressures on them and may not be as quick to adopt AI or maybe as accepting of AI because of what they hear about it, right? That it's biased, that it's hallucinated, or court resources. So what do you think the change looks like in the court system from the bench? Do you envision that unfolding more slowly than the attorneys practicing before the court, or will the attorneys actually influence the judges in that way?
I think the dynamic is that there's lots of judges and each of them really make decisions for themselves. So if one judge is just interested in AI and decides that the judge wants to make AI as part of his or her judging process, the judge can just do it. There's no top-down authority that says, hey, judge, this is what you do. So I think that initially there's going to be some judges who are just interested in technology and think it's cool and will decide to do it. Judge Newsom has written a couple concurring opinions about ChatGPT and how it could be used to determine the ordinary meaning of an English word. And I have heard off the record that some other judges are experimenting with the use of AI for other purposes. And so I think once a few judges start using it and they're like, oh my God, this is pretty incredible, they're going to talk to their colleagues and the culture will shift. But I think initially it's just going to be a small number of judges who are excited about technology. And once they can persuade their colleagues that it works pretty well, their colleagues will eventually follow.
And just to put a plug in, if you are a judge listening to this and you're curious, we would encourage you to listen to our interview with Judge Scott Schlegel of the Louisiana Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where he talks about many of the ways he's using it outside of rendering judgment, but really to make his courtroom more efficient and more effective. So you've sort of covered some different areas where we could really improve the civil justice system. You've written about the criminal justice system. Maybe I could ask you just briefly to summarize some of your writing about criminal appeals and where you see the opportunities there before I take us into our next question.
That's right. So I think that AI has an amazing ability to improve the quality of criminal appeals. Criminal appeals is mostly research and writing. It's not really interacting with the client and arguing in front of a jury. And so research and writing is really what AI does best. There's a lot of advantages to using AI to assist in crafting briefs. First of all, criminal lawyers, especially public defenders, are often under-resourced and can certainly benefit from AI in that respect. And the government also, in some ways, is under-resourced. An individual government lawyer is going to have a lot less resources, a lot less time, and a lot more cases on his or her docket than, for example, a private practice lawyer. Plus, all government lawyers, at least who work for the federal government, have the same client. So in principle, they should be taking the same position. And it seems bad that the fate of a particular criminal defendant will depend on which particular federal prosecutor has the pen. And the use of AI across the federal government could help equalize both the quality and the substance of government briefs, which is what you want when you have a single federal government prosecuting cases. The same is true across the states. And so I do think, and the other thing is, preventing waiver. I mean, the worst thing that happens to a criminal defendant is that he has to sit in jail for 30 years because his lawyer made a mistake. And then the criminal defendant can bring an ineffective assistance claim, but maybe that's going to be time barred, or maybe it won't be quite ineffective enough. I mean, there's lots of ways and lots of examples of people sitting in jail because of mistakes their lawyers made. And there's also lots of examples of prosecutors making mistakes and people going free where even though they shouldn't have. And it's tragic every time a lawyer's mistake causes a wrong outcome in either direction in the criminal justice system. But that's just the inevitable consequence of having a criminal justice system with procedural rules. And if we can use technology to reduce those outcomes, that's all for the better.
It also seems like a great opportunity to effectuate legislative intent when rights are given to defendants who ultimately are convicted, and then they have a right created in the legislation to post-conviction appellate review. I saw this, I clerked on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, so I saw it at the state court level after law school, and I sort of wish that I had seen the quality of the briefs I would have seen in those cases when I was in law school. It would have made me feel a little bit more confident at that point in my life, but I was sort of stunned by the poor quality in many cases for some of the reasons that you're talking about. And certainly I would imagine that when legislators are crafting these laws, they don't imagine that appellate review would include that quality of lawyering. So it feels like a place where we could actually connect what the people want through their elected officials with the executor of that goal. Is that how you see it?
I do. I think people assume that the criminal justice system will work effectively. And when an outcome occurs that shouldn't have occurred because of human error, either by a government lawyer or by a defender, that is a failure of the justice system. Maybe it's an inevitable failure. It's a failure we have to tolerate in a world where procedural rules are enforced, but it's a failure. And AI could help reduce the risk of such failures by allowing people to just upload a brief and say, what are my mistakes here? What arguments did I miss? And it's going to say, you missed this, this, and this. Can I suggest rewriting the section to say that? And the lawyer will be like, oh, well, it's a good thing I asked. And that scenario will be replicated over and over again. And not just that, by the way. As you say, criminal appellate briefs are often just poorly written. As you say, I'm sure you saw lots of those poorly written briefs when you were a law clerk. I did too. And AI is very good at just improving the quality of writing. You just put in a file and say, this is really wooden. It's hard to understand what's going on. Rewrite it in a way that a judge would understand it more clearly. That it can do with no problem at all. It struggles with hallucinating, finding cases that don't exist, and so on. But when you give it a piece of writing and say, like, make this writing better, that it does extremely well.
Yeah. And convicted persons who are using law libraries in prison, I can imagine, having AI supports to ensure that the quality of the arguments that they're able to present to appellate courts could be improved as well, which was something I hadn't even thought of until this conversation. But I certainly saw many of those briefs filed on their own behalf. So I don't know if you've thought about that before. I hadn't really considered it.
I mean, the greatest benefit of AI in the legal profession is for pro ses, because I'm sure you've seen many pro se cases. They're often incomprehensible, handwritten. They have no idea what's going on. Whereas if the pro se person, or maybe it's a relative of the person, because AI in prison, I suspect, won't come anytime soon.
Yeah.
But, relative of the person will, take the fact pattern, maybe the appellate decisions, the indictment or whatever, and just the transcript of the trial and put it into AI and say, find me where my lawyer committed ineffective assistance, and draft up a motion for post-conviction relief based on that. It's going to do it better than the pro se prisoner or relative would do 99 times out of 100.
Yeah. And then, as you said, that it would then come before a judge who could weigh the merits of the arguments that the AI has drafted, which I think is what most people would want, is for a human judge to take a look and see if the arguments are persuasive. So you're talking about all of these great benefits that could come to a system that I don't want to assume you would agree with me has many parts of it that are broken, but that's what I believe on both the civil justice side and the criminal justice side. But you have said that you don't use it in your own practice. Why?
I do use it sometimes to bounce off ideas. So I'm concerned, this is a very parochial concern, but the versions of AI that I personally use don't have very strict protections in terms of confidential information training the model. And so I can't submit confidential information if I don't know that it's going to be protected. That's actually not a problem if you purchase certain enterprise versions of the model, but I think our law firm's still thinking about that, like many other law firms. So, when I have, if I had access, or when I have access to a tool that I could be assured has very strict confidentiality protections, which clients rightfully insist on, I would certainly use it a lot more. So that's one thing. I'm also a little bit imprisoned in my habits. It's just so natural and normal for me to read a brief and just start writing. And I feel a little bit silly when I ask a robot to draft something when my job is to draft it. So still kind of struggling with that aspect of it too, even though part of me really loves using it.
So you are imprisoned by your habits, as you say, because you have practiced for a while now, and you've developed your lawyerly judgment and your exceptional skills through the traditional way of becoming a skilled attorney. I worry a lot about people coming into the profession over the next few years, entering law school, starting jobs in firms or clerkships. And, I teach in a law school. Many of my students will ask, what advice I have for them. And a lot of my advice is the same as the advice that I would have given before the AI era. But I'm wondering how you advise law students if they ask you how they should prepare themselves to continue to add value, when I think a lot of the tasks that they do as junior lawyers will increasingly be capable of being done by a machine. What would you say?
Well, first of all, they definitely have to learn the nuts and bolts of doctrine, just like we learned the nuts and bolts of doctrine. They can't say, well, I don't really understand the difference between res judicata and collateral estoppel. But that's okay, because if this issue comes up, I'll just ask AI and it'll draft that section of the brief. That's not going to work, because AI does make subtle mistakes, and you just have to understand what you're signing when you file it. So you do have to master the legal profession. You can't just assume that AI is going to do things for you. That said, I think that if you want to succeed as a lawyer, that you're going to have to get used to these tools, which means getting an instinctive sense of how to prompt and how to deal with a poor response and how to generate a better response and how to cooperate with AI to produce a better output than you or the AI could have produced alone. It's very hard to offer advice because, first of all, there's so many questions about the future of the legal profession, which depend on many issues, such as how fast is the technology going to improve? What is the regulatory environment going to be? There's amazing question marks. And both regulatory more generally, as well as within the legal profession, to what extent will bar associations permit or encourage or discourage the use of AI? So it's very hard for me to know exactly what strategies a law student should deploy, other than I would encourage people to just understand the technology and be able to use it well if they have to use it.
Great. Thank you. And you are surrounded by lawyers, by your partners all day, by the judges you practiced before. How are you seeing other lawyers respond to this? Are you seeing any shift in some of the initial skepticism as to whether this technology is all that it's cracked up to be? Where are your colleagues and your peers?
There's wild variations. Some of my colleagues and peers think this is the greatest technology of all time and just love it. And some people think it's all hype and can't do anything. Some people don't use it and don't understand the difference between AI and Google. I mean, it's really all over the place. I found that there is a lot of innovation among, as you say, solo practitioners, who are not part of larger organizations. Some of those people have experimented with it. At larger firms, as I said, there's a huge mix. People don't really know what to do with it. People don't really know how to use it. We're always extremely worried that the AI will make a mistake. Like I will tell you, from the perspective of a large law firm, one thing we're terrified of is that someone is going to use it improperly, is going to allow it to hallucinate something. We have lots of procedures to make sure that doesn't happen, but maybe people break the rules. Someone makes a mistake, and then someone else makes a mistake, and then it's in a brief, and then we're sanctioned, and it's a humiliation for our law firm. That hasn't happened. It's never happened. But we're worried about that, and we're worried about, and so we are individual lawyers are very skeptical and very hesitant for that reason. And so that's another thing that people are worried about. And, there's a lot of people who have the attitude of, I want a 0% risk of that happening, about myself being embarrassed, my client being embarrassed. So I'm not even going to use this dangerous tool. It's a huge mix of different reactions towards it. And, people have wildly varying views as to the path forward.
Well, we're almost out of time, Adam. I want to ask you to close, and this is like a surprise question that wasn't on our list, but one prediction that you have as we're entering into 2025, either in the broader tech landscape or for the legal profession around AI.
I think that there will be at least some smaller law firms which build themselves as specifically AI-run law firms, where the pitch is going to be, if you hire us, the entire job will be done with AI with very limited human review. And then the pitch it'll be 80% as good as what you're getting from another law firm, and we're going to charge 1% or 5% of the cost. I think that's going to be a new business model, which some people are going to find attractive. And so I think in the next generation, clients are going to face the choice between like completely AI-run law firms with minimal human interaction and human-run law firms. I think that's going to be a source of competition.
Super interesting. And hopefully will open new markets to currently unserved businesses and individuals as well. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your wisdom and your insight. And I would encourage listeners to follow you on Substack. I love your experiments. They're super helpful, I know, to many lawyers in thinking through where we might apply this exciting technology in the future and prepare for some of the downsides that could come with this technology. So thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody out there for joining us for another episode of Fast Tracked. We'll look forward to seeing you in our next discussion. And until then, be well. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating conversation as much as I did. Visit pli.edu for more insights, education, and resources for navigating this dynamic landscape. And until next time, stay curious and stay adaptable as we work together to chart a course into an exciting future.